Nancy Guthrie sleeps without sound. Not the kind of quiet you choose, the kind that's chosen for you. At 84 years old, she'd recently started using what her friends described as powerful hearing aids, the kind you need when your world has been going silent for years. And at night, when those hearing aids come out and sit on the bedside table, the silence isn't partial anymore. It's total. Her home sits on acres of open desert south of Tucson. The University of Arizona has an agreement with Pima County to keep ambient light to a minimum, protection for the observatory's telescopes. So the sky out here is full of stars, and the ground below them is pitch black. No street lights, no sidewalks, just dark soil, creosote brush, and the kind of emptiness that swallows everything, including screams. On the night of January 31st, 2026, Nancy Guthrie went to bed in that house. By the early hours of February 1st, she was gone. Somebody was counting on that silence. This is Gravel Ghost Basement. The story belongs to the people who can't tell it themselves. Today is day 26. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 26 days. And in the last 48 hours, a piece of evidence has surfaced that reframes everything we thought we knew about the timeline of her abduction. A ring camera, a back road, a vehicle captured at 2:36 in the morning, and an 8-minute window that aligns almost to the second with the moment Nancy's pacemaker lost contact with her phone. But what's most disturbing isn't the footage itself, it's who found it. And why law enforcement didn't. Within the first days of the investigation, the Pima County Sheriff's Office made a decision. They drew a circle, 2 miles in every direction from Nancy Guthrie's front door, and sent an alert to every resident inside it. Check your ring cameras, check your Nest cameras, check your doorbell footage. The window was wide, January 1st through February 1st. Anything you've got, we want to see it. On its face, this is standard. 2 miles is a meaningful radius. And in this part of the Tucson Basin, you're not talking about dense suburban blocks. These are large properties, 1 to 4 acres each. The homes are set far back from the road. Some have gates. Most have long driveways. You can have cameras on every corner of your house and still not capture what's happening on the street because the street might be 200 yards away. So the 2-mile perimeter made sense as a starting point. The problem is, it may have also been the ending point. Because if you know the roads south of Tucson, really know them, there's a network of back routes that thread out of Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood without ever touching a major intersection. No traffic lights, no commercial plazas with security cameras, no license plate readers. Just 2-lane desert roads that bend through residential acreage and empty scrubland until they connect to highways miles away. Journalists who've driven these routes in broad daylight have said they're difficult to navigate even with the sun up. The turns aren't intuitive. The landmarks are sparse. You'd either need to know this area intimately, or you'd need a navigation app guiding you turn by turn. And if you were driving these roads at 2:30 in the morning with no streetlights and no moon bright enough to cut through the desert dark, you'd be outside the sheriff's 2-mile perimeter in roughly 7 minutes. 7 minutes. And on the other side of that line, nobody was asked to check their cameras. Let's walk this geography because it matters. Nancy Guthrie's home sits in a residential area that's rural in character, but not isolated. There are neighbors. Not close neighbors, not the kind who share a fence, but neighbors within a few hundred yards in multiple directions. The kind of area where you might wave to someone on your morning walk, but you wouldn't hear a commotion at their house after midnight. Leading away from this neighborhood, there are arterial roads that connect to the wider Tucson road grid. These roads have intersections. Some have cameras. Some have the kind of commercial traffic, gas stations, convenience stores, strip malls, where security footage rolls 24 hours a day. If you drove out the main routes, you'd leave a digital trail. Maybe not a clear one, but a trail. Then there are the back roads. These routes wind through areas with almost no commercial development. The properties are large. The road shoulders are dirt. And critically, thanks to the University of Arizona's dark sky agreement, there is almost no ambient light. We're not talking about dim streets. We're talking about a darkness so complete that if you turned off your headlights, you could put your hand in front of your face and struggle to see it. Someone who planned a route along these back roads would avoid every camera, every reader, every intersection where a chance encounter with another driver might produce a witness. You'd be invisible. The trade-off is that you'd need to know where you were going or trust a screen to tell you. And that raises a question the FBI should be able to answer. Navigation apps leave traces. Cell towers log connections. If someone was using Waze or Google Maps to navigate back roads out of Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood between 2 and 3 a.m. on February 1st, that data exists somewhere. Whether anyone has pulled it yet, we don't know. The FBI has said almost nothing about the technical side of this investigation. But here's what we do know. For 25 days, nobody in law enforcement asked a single resident along those back roads if their cameras caught anything. Not one knock on a door, not one alert sent, not one request. It took a journalist to do that. If you followed the murders in Moscow, Idaho, you'll remember a detail that became a painful footnote in that investigation. When police finally identified the white Hyundai Elantra as a vehicle of interest and began canvassing businesses along the suspect's likely route, some of those businesses told them the same thing. The footage was gone. Their systems had already overwritten it. Standard retention cycles. 30 days, 14 days, sometimes less. Ring cameras are no different. Depending on the plan, footage can cycle out in as little as 30 days. Some users save clips manually. Most don't. The footage just quietly disappears, replaced by the next day's recordings, then the next, until whatever was captured at 2:36 on a February morning is nothing but freed up storage space. By the time Fox News knocked on doors outside the 2-mile radius, it was already day 25. 25 days of potential overwrites. 25 days of homeowners who had no idea their cameras might hold something relevant, and no reason to save what they had. The question isn't whether the 2-mile perimeter was reasonable as a starting point. The question is what happened when the evidence inside that perimeter didn't produce a break. The standard investigative move is to expand, widen the aperture, push the concentric circle outward, at minimum along the routes that lead away from the scene. Every day you don't do that, the window closes a little more. And on day 25, a Fox News team found what law enforcement hadn't looked for. Elias and Danielle Strategoulias, and I may be mispronouncing their name, so my apologies to them, live approximately 2.5 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home. That puts them just outside the sheriff's canvas perimeter. A half-mile past the line where law enforcement stopped asking questions. Their home sits on one of those back roads. The kind we just described, the kind that leads out of Nancy's neighborhood without touching a single major intersection. And like a lot of homeowners in the area, they have street-facing ring cameras. When Fox News reporter Michael Ruiz and his team went beyond the 2-mile radius and started knocking on doors, the Strategoulias family had something to show them. Their cameras had captured 12 separate vehicles passing their home between approximately midnight and 6 a.m. on the morning of February 1st. 12 vehicles on a dark back road in the dead of night. The couple told Fox that this number wasn't unusual for their street. Cars pass, people come home late, shift workers, night owls, teenagers. There are explanations for most of them. What was unusual, what the couple found difficult to understand, was that in 25 days since the most high-profile abduction in Tucson's recent history, no one from law enforcement had visited their neighborhood. No knock, no alert, no request. They didn't know their footage might matter, and because nobody told them. Credit where it's unambiguously due. This footage exists in the investigative record right now because of Michael Ruiz and his team at Fox Digital. Not because a detective drove past the perimeter line, not because the FBI expanded the canvas. Because a news crew did what investigations are supposed to do: go where the evidence might be and ask. After reviewing the footage, Fox alerted both the FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Office to what they'd found. They handed the material over. The question of whether this footage is significant to the investigation, whether any of these 12 vehicles are connected to Nancy Guthrie's abduction, remains unanswered. Law enforcement has not commented on it, but let's set aside the institutional failure for a moment, because one of those 12 vehicles was captured at a very specific time. And that time changes everything about how we understand the night Nancy disappeared. Let me slow this down, because the math here is important and it deserves to be heard clearly. Here is what we know about the morning of February 1st, 2025. Nancy Guthrie wears a pacemaker. That pacemaker is paired to her iPhone via Bluetooth. The phone sits in her bedroom, likely on a nightstand or nearby surface. As long as Nancy is within Bluetooth range of that phone, the connection holds. The moment she moves far enough away, through a wall, down a hallway, out a door, the signal breaks, and that break is logged. According to the timeline released by the Pima County Sheriff's Office, Nancy's pacemaker separated from her iPhone at approximately 2:28 a.m. Let that number settle. 2:28 a.m. The working theory, supported by the blood evidence and the doorbell camera footage, is that this is the moment Nancy was moved out of her bedroom, through the house, and out the front door. We know blood droplets were found inside the home and on the front porch. The pattern was consistent, small. Round drops falling straight down, suggesting a wound that was bleeding freely but without the smearing or tracking you'd associate with a violent struggle in motion. She was upright. She was moving, or being moved. As she crossed the threshold of the front door, or stepped onto the porch, she moved beyond the Bluetooth range of her phone, and the pacemaker logged the disconnect. 2:28 a.m. The last electronic signal Nancy Guthrie's body sent to anyone. Now. The Strategulous ring camera sits 2.5 miles away. The drive between Nancy's home and that camera, along the back road, takes approximately 7 minutes. At 2:36 a.m., a single vehicle was captured on that camera, 8 minutes after the pacemaker separation, on a 7-minute drive. I want you to sit with that arithmetic for a moment, because the margin is razor thin. Start the clock at 2:28. Nancy is out of Bluetooth range. She's either on the porch or being placed into a vehicle in the driveway. There are things that have to happen in that gap. The suspect has to secure her, get to the driver's side, start the vehicle. She'll pull out of the property, maybe 30 seconds, maybe 90. Then 7 minutes of driving on dark back roads with no street lights to a point 2.5 miles away. 2:28 plus 8 minutes equals 2:36. And there it is, a vehicle on camera at exactly the time the math says it should be there. That could be a coincidence. Someone coming home late, a delivery driver, a neighbor who couldn't sleep. At 2:36 a.m. on a back road in the desert, any vehicle is unusual, but not impossible. Or it could be the vehicle that carried Nancy Guthrie away from her home for the last time. And for 25 days, this footage sat on a ring camera that nobody asked to see. Fox News asked a retired NYPD detective and national security expert named Pat Brosnan to review the footage. His assessment, and I want to be precise about what this is and what it isn't, is that the vehicle's profile is consistent with a Kia Soul. He based this on the slanted roofline, the design of the windows, the rear quarter glass, and what appear to be vertical brake lights. This is not a law enforcement identification. This is not a bolo. This is not the Pima County Sheriff saying, as Moscow police eventually said about the white Elantra, we are looking for this vehicle. This is one experienced analyst's interpretation of grainy nighttime ring camera footage. But here is what makes it significant. As of day 26, law enforcement has released no vehicle description to the public. None. No make, no model, no color. Nothing for the thousands of people following this case to look for. No framework for turning public attention into actionable tips. If Brosnan's assessment is even directionally correct, the public has been sitting on potentially useful information for nearly 4 weeks without knowing they should be looking for it. And we will watch this space carefully. If law enforcement confirms or denies a vehicle of interest in the coming days, that changes the landscape of this case entirely. While the Ring camera footage represents what law enforcement may have missed, the events of February 13th represent what they were actively pursuing. And the details that have emerged in the weeks since paint a picture of an investigation that, behind the silence, has been more aggressive than most of us assumed. Friday night, February 13th, 13 days after Nancy's disappearance. A massive law enforcement response converged on a residential property roughly 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home. Multiple units, federal agents, a coordinated operation that unfolded at 2 locations simultaneously. At the house, a woman was escorted out and taken to a neighbor's home. According to the New York Times, FBI agents asked the neighbor to look after her while they searched the property. A young man was also detained at the scene. At a Culver's restaurant nearby, a third individual, a man, was detained in the parking lot. He was placed in handcuffs, seated in a law enforcement vehicle, and questioned. In the Culver's parking lot, officers focused on a silver Range Rover, dusty, license plate obscured. It was photographed, examined, and eventually towed into evidence. Then the privacy shields went up. And if you were watching this unfold in real time, and thousands were, that moment sent a wave of dread through every comment section, every live stream, every group chat following this case. Privacy shields around a vehicle in an abduction investigation carry a grim implication. You put up shields when you don't want cameras to see what you're about to find. No arrests were made. All detainees were released without charges. And for nearly 2 weeks, the specifics of what happened that night and why remained largely opaque. Until now. What follows comes from a law enforcement source with direct knowledge of the February 13th operation. I'm going to present this carefully, distinguishing between what this source has confirmed and where gaps remain. The primary target of the raid was the man detained at the Culver's restaurant. He had been at the home, his mother's home, earlier that evening. He left to pick up food, and that departure was the trigger. Law enforcement had been watching him, not from a car down the street. From the air. A law enforcement surveillance plane had been tracking his movements for what the source described as a while. The duration isn't specific, but the implication is clear. This wasn't a snap decision. This was planned. They were waiting for the right moment to move. When he left the house and drove to the Culvers, they had their moment. 2 simultaneous operations launched. One team detained him at the restaurant. A separate team entered the home, escorted his mother out, and executed a search warrant. The man was connected to the silver Range Rover. The source confirmed he had been driving it. Whether he owned it remained unclear. Even within law enforcement, ownership was still being assessed at the time. But the connection was firm. He was using that vehicle, and there were indications it may have been used in illegal activities. Now, here's where it gets significant. To obtain the warrant, investigators presented 4 pillars of probable cause to a judge. First, cell phone data placing the individual in a relevant area at a relevant time. Second, his criminal history, which includes illegal trafficking. Third, a physical resemblance to the figure captured on the doorbell camera at Nancy Guthrie's home. And fourth, and this is the one that carries the most weight, a specific tip from an identified person, not an anonymous call, not a vague lead, a specific individual providing specific information. 4 pillars. enough for a warrant. Enough for a surveillance plane, enough for a coordinated two-location raid with federal assets. But not enough yet for an arrest. That distinction matters, and it's one that's frustrated a lot of people following this case. Probable cause gets you through the door. It gets you the warrant, the search, the seizure of evidence. It does not, by itself, get you the charges. The legal threshold for arrest is higher than the threshold for a search, and the investigation wasn't finished. During the raid, phones were seized from the detainees. According to the source, those phones were still being processed as of several days ago. The timeline for extraction, particularly for encrypted applications, can stretch to several weeks from the date of seizure. February 13th to February 26th is 13 days. The work is ongoing. If there are encrypted messaging apps on those devices, and in cases involving trafficking, there almost always are cracking them is not instantaneous. It requires specialized tools, legal authorization for each layer of access, and patience. The kind of patience that looks, from the outside, like inaction. And now the privacy shields. Because this is the moment that set the internet on fire, and the explanation is less dramatic than anyone hoped or feared. According to the source, law enforcement did not suspect a body was inside the Range Rover. The shields were not erected because agents saw something alarming through the tinted windows. The shields went up because the media was everywhere. Cameras from every angle, drones overhead, live streams running. And when officers opened the rear hatch of the Range Rover, they wanted to examine the contents without broadcasting that examination to a global audience in real time. That's it. Operational security, evidence protection, standard procedure when you're executing a search in what had effectively become an open-air television studio. It was smart, it was routine, and it generated more speculation in 48 hours than the investigation had produced in 2 weeks. The lesson here, and it applies to everyone following this case, including those of us covering it, is that the absence of information is not the presence of a narrative. Well, when we don't know what's behind the shield, the human instinct is to fill the void with the worst possibility. Sometimes the worst possibility is real. Sometimes the shield is just a shield. So, where does the Range Rover thread stand today? The vehicle remains in evidence. The phones remain in forensic processing. The detainees were released without charges but without exoneration. Whether this thread connects to the vehicle captured at 2:36 a.m. on the Stratagulius Ring camera, or whether these are two entirely separate lines of investigation is unknown. What's known is that both remain active, both remain unresolved, and Nancy Guthrie remains missing. Step back for a moment and look at these two threads side by side. On one hand, you have the Ring camera footage, a potential sighting of the vehicle that carried Nancy away, found not by the investigation, but by a news outlet that went where investigators apparently hadn't. Evidence that may have surfaced too late, on cameras that might have already been overwritten in other homes along that same route. A lead born from a gap in the canvas. On the other hand, you have the February 13th raid, a coordinated, federally backed operation involving aerial surveillance, multiple arrest teams, a search warrant built on 4 pillars of probable cause, and a phone forensics process that's still underway. A lead born from active, aggressive investigation. One thread suggests the investigation missed something. The other suggests the investigation is deeper and more sophisticated than public silence has implied. Both can be true at the same time. But what connects them, what unites every aspect of this case on day 26, is the void between what law enforcement knows and what the public has been told. 26 days. No suspect vehicle announced. No physical description beyond a grainy doorbell cam image. No suspect profile. And $1 million reward from the Guthrie family. And no public framework for what kind of information might help claim it. The FBI has its reasons for maintaining silence. Operational security. The protection of ongoing investigative techniques. The risk that premature disclosures could compromise a prosecution or alert a suspect. These are legitimate reasons. They may even be the right call. But for the people of Tucson, for the neighbors who might have ring footage they don't know is relevant, for the drivers who might have passed a Kia Soul on a back road and thought nothing of it, silence has a cost, too. One more detail, and I want to frame this with appropriate caution because we're working from a low-resolution image and the conclusions are interpretive, not forensic. The doorbell camera footage from Nancy Guthrie's home captured the suspect on the front porch. In that footage, there's an object visible protruding from the suspect's pocket. Online analysis has generated several theories: the corner of an iPhone, a lockpick pen, a flashlight. But the assessment that carries the most weight comes from individuals with direct, career-long experience carrying tactical equipment. A retired law enforcement officer with 38 years on the job examined the image and stated plainly, "That's a radio antenna." His reasoning: the shape, the height above the pocket line, and crucially, the way the pocket can't fully close around it, that's consistent with a handheld radio where the antenna extends above the housing. You can cinch the pocket fabric around the body of the radio, but the antenna has to remain exposed. An iPhone, by contrast, slides flat into a pocket. You don't leave an iPhone hanging out of your pocket when you're committing a crime. That phone is your identity. You tuck it deep or you leave it behind. A radio serves a different purpose. A radio connects you to someone who isn't on the porch. If that object is a walkie-talkie, and that remains an if, the implication is coordination. A second person, likely in a vehicle, waiting. The suspect on the porch makes the entry, secures Nancy, and signals, "Pull up now." This is not confirmed. This is analytical interpretation of ambiguous evidence. But it aligns with the timeline we've already established: the speed of the operation, the efficiency of the escape route, the fact that someone had clearly planned the back road exit in advance. Solo operators can do a lot of damage, but this level of coordination, the route knowledge, the timing, the pacemaker gap, the 236 vehicle suggests this was not one person acting on impulse. And through all of this, the timelines and the perimeters and the warrants and the radio antennas, it's possible to lose sight of the person at the center. Nancy Guthrie is not a pacemaker signal. She's not a blood droplet pattern. She's not a timestamp on a Ring camera or a data point on an investigator's timeline. She's a woman, 84 years old, a mother, a grandmother, someone whose friends knew her well enough to know what kind of hearing aids she wore, and someone whose daughter, Savannah, a journalist who understands the weight of every word she chooses, stood in front of cameras and said, "My mother was taken from her bed in the dark of night." Not a figure of speech, a description. An 84-year-old woman who couldn't hear the person who came for her, who was pulled from her bed in a house surrounded by acres of darkness, vast in a part of the desert where the stars are protected, but the people beneath them are not, whose blood marked a path from inside her home to the front porch, whose pacemaker, the device her body depended on to keep her heart beating in the right rhythm, sent one last electronic signal at 2:28 in the morning before going silent. 26 days. Somewhere, someone knows who was driving that back road at 2:36 a.m. Someone knows the make, the model, and the person behind the wheel. Hey, they may know because they were in the vehicle. They may know because someone they know came home that night and said nothing about where they'd been. The Guthrie family has offered $1 million for information that leads to Nancy. $1 million. And so far, no one has come forward. Ask yourself what that tells you about who's keeping this secret, and what it would take to break them. This is Gravel Ghost Basement. Kindly subscribe to this channel for more updates. And remember, the story belongs to the people who can't tell it themselves. If you have information about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, contact the Pima County Sheriff's Department or the FBI's Tucson field office. I'll be back when there's something worth saying. Nancy is waiting. Let's find her.